Beneath the fractured moon, a single snowflake traced the curve of her cheek like a lover's forgotten tear. Ilara stumbled through the whispering pines, the wind clawing at her threadbare cloak as if the forest itself rejected her presence. The air was sharp as shattered glass, carrying the distant cheers of the kingdom like echoes from a dream she could no longer claim. They had crowned him that very night, King Thorn, the new Alpha, his broad shoulders draped in furs stained with the ritual blood of victory. The pack had roared their approval, their howls rising like smoke from the great hall's hearth. But Ilara had seen it. The old king's blood, dark and accusing, smeared across Thorn's knuckles, hidden beneath the cheers but burning in her Omega's sight. She alone had witnessed the tremor in his gaze, the guilt that flickered like a dying ember before he turned away. Now, banished for her unseen visions, she was cast into the wilds, her bond to the pack severed like a throat in the hunt. The elders had called her cursed, a whisperer of shadows, unfit for the lunar rites. The Deucer does not favor those who see too much, they had intoned, their voices cold as the iron chains that once bound her wrists during the rejection ceremony. They had stripped her of her mark, the silver locket that hung heavy at her throat, a heirloom etched with the moon's eternal phases, its inner curve holding a single drop of her mother's dried blood, a symbol of the Pathfinder's gift she could no longer deny. It pulsed now against her skin, warm despite the frost, as if the blood within remembered the warmth of belonging. The snow deepened with every faltering step, swallowing her boots up to the ankles, then the calves. Her breath came in ragged clouds, mingling with the scent of pine resin and distant smoke. The mountain pass loomed ahead, a jagged scar against the starless sky, where the wind howled like the spirits of forgotten Omegas. Ilara's body ached from the march, her limbs heavy with the weight of exile. She had been left to die here, as the old laws decreed. No food, no fire, just the mercy of the wilds. But mercy was a cruel jest in this frozen realm. The wolves' distant calls promised only teeth and hunger. She collapsed against a boulder, its surface slick with ice, and pressed her palm to the locket. The metal bit into her flesh, grounding her as memories flooded in like a winter torrent. Thorn's face during the crowning, those storm-grey eyes locking onto hers for a heartbeat too long. He had been the one to enforce her banishment, his voice steady as he recited the words of severance. Yet in that gaze, she had glimpsed the fracture, the weight of the throne he had claimed through betrayal, the old king's life snuffed out not in honorable combat, but in the shadows of ambition. The kingdom cheered their new Alpha, blind to the blood that bound him, but Ilara's gift, the Pathfinder's curse, revealed the truth. She saw the threads of destiny, the crimson stains that lingered on souls long after the kill. "Why me?" she whispered to the wind, her voice cracking like thin ice. The Deuce's symbols mocked her, the moon above, waxing toward fullness, casting silver light on the snow that drank her tears. Strength, she had been taught, was in submission, in yielding to the Alpha's will. But what was strength, if not enduring the blade of rejection? Her heart pounded, a drum of defiance amid the silence as the cold seeped into her bones. She imagined the warmth of the great hall, the fire's roar, and the pack's unified breath now forever lost. In their eyes she was broken, a Omega without a mate, a seer without a pack. Yet the locket warmed again, its blood-drop core a reminder. Every wound was a map to rebirth. A low growl rippled through the trees, freezing her blood. Not wolves, something heavier, more deliberate. Ilara's senses sharpened, the Pathfinder's instinct flaring like a hidden flame. The wind shifted, carrying the metallic tang of fresh blood and the musk of alpha fury. She rose, trembling, her fingers tracing the locket's edges, as if it could shield her. Shadows moved in the tree line, a figure emerging from the gloom, tall, cloaked in midnight furs, his silhouette cutting against the lunar glow. His breath was labored, ragged with pain, and as he staggered closer, the moonlight revealed the gash across his side, dark blood seeping through torn leather. Thorn, the new king, fleeing into the night, his eyes wild with the hunt's aftermath. But how? The cheers had only just faded. Ilara's pulse thundered, fear and an unwelcome pull warring within her. He was the architect of her exile, the hand that had spilled the old blood. Yet here he was, marked by his own guilt, collapsing mere paces from her hiding place. Their gazes met across the snow-churned clearing, his stormy confusion crashing against her quiet horror. Instinct screamed to run, to let the wilds claim him as they would her. But the locket burned hot now, its ancient blood whispering of threads unseen, of destinies entwined in the deuce's weave. The wind howled louder, carrying uivos from the valley below, hunters on his trail. Ilara's choice hung in the frigid air, turn away or step into the storm that had already scarred them both. What was redemption? If not facing the blood one could not unsee. The snow swirled like restless ghosts between them, the wind's howl a dirge for choices yet unmade. Ilara's breath caught in her throat, sharp as the frost that rimmed her vision, as Thorn's form solidified in the moonlight, a king unthroned by his own shadows, his cloak torn and dusted with the white veil of the wilds. Blood trailed from his side, staining the pristine snow in ragged crimson arcs, each drop a accusation that mirrored the old king's life force she had glimpsed hours before. His eyes, those storm-grey depths, locked onto hers with a ferocity that pierced the night, holding not command, but a raw, unraveling plea. She should have fled. The Pathfinder's gift thrummed in her veins, urging her toward the shadowed pass where the pines offered cover, where she could vanish like mist before dawn. He was the blade that had severed her from the pack, his voice echoing in her memory as he pronounced her exile. Steady, unyielding, the weight of the crown already pressing fractures into his resolve. Yet here he stood, or staggered, the architect of betrayal. His body a testament to the hunt that pursued him. The distant weavos rose again, sharper now, a chorus of the kingdom's hounds baying for the alpha who had spilled sacred blood not in open challenge, but in the deceitful hush of the throne room. Thorn's hand pressed against his wound, fingers slick with his own life, and he took a step forward, the snow crunching beneath his boots like brittle bones. "You!" he rasped, his voice a gravelly thunder muffled by pain, recognition dawning in the furrow of his brow. The air thickened with the scent of him, iron and pine, alpha musk laced with the acrid bite of fear. Ilara's omega instincts recoiled, a tidal pull toward submission, warring with the fire of her rejection. She was no longer his to command. The severance had burned that bond to ash, but the locket at her throat pulsed hotter, its blood-drop core a living ember against her chilled skin, whispering of threads that defied the elder's decrees. Instinct drew her hand to her chest, fingers curling protectively around the silver chain, as if it could ward off the invisible snare tightening between them. Fear coiled in her gut, cold and serpentine. Fear of his touch, of the power that radiated from him even in weakness, of the curiosity that bloomed unbidden in her chest like a thorned flower. Why was he here, in this forsaken stretch of the mountains? The kingdom's cheers still echoed in her mind, a mocking symphony to his ascension. Had the Deucer woven this encounter as punishment, or as the first cruel twist of redemption? She saw it again in flashes, the old king's blood on his hands, not triumphant crimson, but a stain of regret that clung like frost to his soul. He collapsed to one knee, the impact sending a puff of snow skyward, and Ilara's resolve cracked like thin ice underfoot. The wind whipped her cloak, exposing the pale curve of her shoulder marked only by the faint scar of severance, a reminder of her broken place. Curiosity overrode the flight, pulling her forward despite the tremor in her limbs. She approached warily, the snow muffling her steps, until she knelt at arm's length, the metallic tang of his blood invading her senses. Up close, the wound was a jagged betrayal. Claw marks too precise for beasts, too savage for mere rivals, poisoned perhaps by the traitors who whispered in the court's shadows, those who coveted the throne he had wrested through guile. "Who hunts you, king?" she whispered, the title tasting bitter on her tongue, laced with the irony of her own banishment. Her voice was steady, forged in the forge of exile, but her eyes betrayed the storm within, horror at his vulnerability, a flicker of pity she dared not name. Thorn's gaze lifted, stormy and searching, as if peering through the veil of her defiance into the Pathfinder's truth she bore. "Not king," he murmured, the words a confession dragged from the depths. "Traitor. The old blood. It calls them." His hand twitched toward her, not in dominance, but in desperate reach, stopping short as if burned by the proximity. The connection sparked then, instinctive and unwelcome, a silken thread of alpha-omega pull, humming beneath the skin like the moon's gravitational sigh. It was not desire, not yet, but recognition, the fear in his eyes mirroring her own, curiosity kindling in the space where hatred should have reigned. Ilara's heart battered against her ribs, the locket's warmth spreading like liquid fire through her chest. She could feel the Deuce's gaze upon them, the waxing moon a silent witness, casting prismatic light on the bloodied snow. The Weavos grew nearer, a relentless tide crashing against the night's fragile peace. Denial surged within her. This was no fated union, but a collision of the damned. He had cast her out, enforced the Elder's will with the cold precision of duty, blind to the visions that now haunted him. Yet in his fractured stare, she glimpsed the melancholy king beneath the crown, ethical to a fault, burdened by the duty that demanded betrayal, guilt etching lines into his face like runes of sorrow. She rose abruptly, the cold air slicing through her as she backed away, the pull resisting every inch. "Leave me to the wilds, as you promised," she said, her voice a whip-crack in the wind, though fear laced its edges, fear of the bond stirring, of the curiosity that begged her to unravel his wounds. Thorn pushed to his feet with a grimace, his breath ragged, the blood from his side painting dark patterns on the snow like an oracle's ink. But the shadows shifted, branches snapping under unseen pursuit, and the night closed in, forcing the question, deny the thread or grasp it in the face of the storm? And now I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The wind's fury lashed like invisible whips, driving the snow into blinding veils that blurred the line between earth and sky. Ilara's retreat faltered as the Weavos crested the ridge, a savage symphony of pursuit tearing through the night. Not the wild wolves of the mountains, but the kingdom's enforcers, their howls laced with the metallic edge of steel and vengeance. Thorn's blood had summoned them, the old king's stain, a beacon for those who sniffed out betrayal in the shadows of the court. She could smell their intent on the gale. The bitter reek of torch smoke and oiled blades, the acrid undercurrent of alpha rage unleashed. He staggered toward her, defiance etched in the set of his jaw, but his body betrayed him, knees buckling under the poison's insidious creep. The wound at his side wept freely now, crimson blooming against the black leather like a rose unfurling in frost-kissed petals. Ilara's Pathfinder senses flared, visions flickering at the edges of her sight, threads of silver moonlight weaving through the dark, pulling her inexorably toward him despite the chasm of her exile. To aid him was madness, a tether to the pack that had discarded her like chaff in the wind. Yet the locket thrummed against her chest, its dried blood core an insistent pulse, as if her mother's essence urged her to trace the map of wounds that bound them. "Run!" Thorn growled, his voice a ragged command, laced with the gravel of pain. But his eyes, those storm-grey tempests, held no order, only a fractured vulnerability that mirrored her own isolation. He pushed himself upright, hand fumbling for the dagger at his belt, its hilt slick with melting snow and his own life. The enforcers' silhouettes crested the tree line, 3 shadows against the moon's fractured glow, their cloaks billowing like raven wings. One raised a horn, its blast a thunderclap that shook the pines, while the others fanned out, boots crunching the snow with predatory precision. Ilara's heart hammered, a wild drum echoing the Deusa's distant rhythm. Flight alone would not outpace them. The pass narrowed ahead, a choke point where the wind funneled like a predator's breath. Instinct that cursed Omega pull intertwined with her gift, surged through her veins. She grabbed his arm, the contact electric, his skin fever-hot beneath the chill, and yanked him toward a jagged outcrop, half-veiled by overhanging boughs. "Not without cover," she hissed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. The locket swung free, catching the moonlight in a silver arc, its blood drop glinting like an accusation. They stumbled into the crevice, a shallow cave carved by ancient avalanches, its mouth guarded by ice-slick boulders and thorny underbrush that snagged at their cloaks like desperate fingers. Ilara pressed Thorn against the rear wall, the rough stone biting into his back as she tore a strip from her own tattered hem. The fabric was thin, scented with her exile's sweat and pine, but it would staunch the flow. Her fingers worked swiftly, binding the wound with a pressure that drew a hiss from his lips, not of pain alone, but of the intimacy forced upon them. Up close, his scent enveloped her, the wild musk of alpha tempered by the copper tang of blood, undercut by something deeper, a melancholy earthiness like rain-soaked soil after a storm. The enforcers closed in, their voices carrying on the wind, guttural curses invoking the old king's name, promises of the noose for the usurper. One kicked at the snow near their hiding place, his boot sending a cascade of powder over the entrance, but the shadows held. Ilara's breath mingled with Thorn's, shallow and synchronized in the confined space, the air thick with the heat of their proximity. She could feel the rise and fall of his chest against her side, the subtle tremor of his restraint as the bond stirred unbidden, not the crude dominance of pack law, but a quieter resonance, empathy threading through the fear like moonlight piercing clouds. "Why protect the one who cast you out?" he murmured, his words a low rumble that vibrated through her, his gaze searching hers in the dim glow filtering from the cave mouth. The poison dulled his edges, stripping away the king's armor to reveal the man beneath, ethical to his core, yet haunted by the duty that had demanded fratricide. Guilt shadowed his features, lines carved deep as the mountain scars outside, and in that moment Ilara saw the fracture she had glimpsed during the crowning. The old blood, not a trophy, but a chain forged in the throne room's deceit. She tied off the bandage, her hands lingering a fraction too long, the warmth of his skin seeping into her chilled fingers. "Because the Deusa does not weave threads for the strong alone," she whispered, the words tasting of ancient lore, drawn from the locket's silent wisdom. "And because I see the blood you cannot wash away." The enforcers passed perilously close, one pausing to sniff the air, his shadow looming like judgment. Thorn tensed, his free hand brushing hers in a fleeting anchor, the touch igniting a spark. Curiosity blooming into something perilously close to understanding. He had enforced her banishment out of duty, blind to her visions. But now, in this refuge of stone and silence, the walls between them thinned, her rejection, his guilt, twin wounds bleeding into shared vulnerability. A distant uivo signaled their retreat, the horn's echo fading as the storm intensified, blanketing their trail in fresh white. But the reprieve was fleeting. the kingdom's hounds would circle back, drawn by the scent of spilled royal blood. Ilara pulled away slightly, the bond humming in protest, her mind a whirlwind of denial and dawning connection. He was no savior, no fated mate, merely a king broken by his crown, seeking shelter in the arms of the outcast. Yet empathy stirred, a tender shoot amid the thorns of pain, transforming fear into the fragile first weave of trust. Thorn's eyes held hers, stormy depths reflecting the moon's pale fire. The old blood. It was not honor, he confessed, voice barely above the wind's murmur. The admission a crack in his melancholy armor, but necessity. The court rots from within, traitors who would drown us all in their ambition. His fingers grazed the locket at her throat, not claiming, but tracing its curve with reverent curiosity, as if sensing the Pathfinder's pulse within. The contact sent a shiver through her, not of cold, but of revelation. The Deuce's symbols converging, blood and moon binding their fates in this hidden sanctum. Outside, the snow fell heavier, a shroud over the night's confessions, but within, the air warmed with unspoken vows. Ilara turned her face to the cave wall, the stone's chill a counter to the heat rising in her chest. What was strength if not choosing alliance over solitude? The bond deepened, empathy forging links stronger than iron. Even as the wilds whispered of trials yet to come, the locket cooled against her skin, its blood a quiet sentinel as the first light of false dawn crept toward their refuge, a fragile peace, teetering on the edge of the storm's return. The false dawn's pallor seeped into the cave like diluted milk, casting elongated shadows that danced across the stone walls as if the Deucer herself stirred the embers of night. Ilara shifted against the rough floor, her body numb from the cold that had settled into her bones during the night's vigil, yet the space beside her radiated a persistent warmth. Thorn's presence, his breathing steady now, the poison's grip loosened by her makeshift binding, and the shallow hours of uneasy rest. The locket lay heavy against her collarbone, its silver surface etched with faint scratches from the night's frenzy, the blood drop within a dormant heart awaiting its cue. She watched him in the half-light, his face slack in repose, the lines of guilt softened, but not erased. Storm-grey lashes fluttered against cheeks dusted with frost, and his hand, still crusted with dried blood, his own mingled with echoes of the old king's, rested inches from hers. The air in the cave hung thick, scented with the metallic residue of his wound, and the earthy dampness of stone kissed by eternal winter. Outside, the wind had relented to a mournful sigh, whispering through the pines like secrets too heavy for the dawn to bear. Ilara's mind churned with the night's confessions, his murmured admission of necessity and betrayal clashing against the Pathfinder's visions that haunted her. Crimson threads weaving through the court's gilded halls, binding the throne to shadows deeper than any alpha's ambition. A tremor stirred within her, subtle at first, like the quiver of a bowstring before release. The locket warmed, not the gradual heat of proximity, but a sudden flare, as if the dried blood inside ignited with lunar fire. Ilara gasped, her hand flying to her throat, fingers closing around the metal that now pulsed in rhythm with her quickening heart. Visions cascaded then, unbidden and vivid, crashing over her like a winter wave, not fragments, but a torrent. The Deuce's gift unfurling in full, raw splendor for the first time since her banishment. She saw the old king's final moments, not the honorable duel the pack believed, but a poisoned chalice in the throne room, offered by a hand cloaked in alliance, the traitor's smile as sharp as the blade hidden in his sleeve. Thorn's face, twisted in reluctant resolve, his own dagger flashing in the torchlight to end the suffering mercy none else would grant. But deeper still, the threads extended. A rival alpha, Lord Draven, his eyes gleaming with avarice, plotting from the frozen spires of the eastern citadel, his spies already threading through the kingdom's veins like frostbite. Ilara's body arched, a silent cry escaping her lips as the cave spun in prismatic shards, moonlight refracting through imagined crystals, painting the walls in silver and crimson. She clutched the locket tighter, the blood-drop core searing her palm, drawing a thin line of her own blood to mingle with the ancient stain. The pain anchored her, pulling the visions into focus. Draven's mark. A twisted thorn emblem burned into the flesh of his enforcers, the same pattern she had glimpsed on the pursuers' cloaks the night before. And then, the revelation that stole her breath. A silver path, luminous and unyielding, leading from her own scarred heart to Thorn's wounded side. The Deuce's weave declaring her not cursed, but chosen. The Pathfinder's true dominion. To illuminate the hidden blood, to guide the guilty toward absolution or abyss. Thorn jolted awake, his alpha instincts flaring as he grasped her wrist, his touch firm yet restrained, the storm in his eyes clearing to sharp awareness. "Ilara," he breathed, the name a low thunder, his gaze tracing the flush of exertion on her face, the bead of blood on her lip where she had bitten back the surge. The cave seemed to contract around them, the air humming with the residue of her manifestation, sense sharpening, her omega essence blooming like night jasmine amid the blood and stone. He released her slowly, but his fingers lingered, brushing the locket as if drawn by its fading glow, curiosity yielding to a dawning awe that cracked his melancholy facade. "What did you see?" His voice was a velvet rasp, laced with the weight of a king who had long denied the spiritual currents beneath his duty. He sat up straighter, wincing as the bandage tugged at his healing wound, but his focus remained on her, unblinking, the ethical core of him reaching for truth amid the guilt that had shadowed his reign. She met his stare, the visions after images flickering in her peripheral sight, crimson rivers converging under the moon's judgmental gaze. The words tumbled out, poetic and fractured, her voice weaving the Deuce's lore into confession. "The blood you carry, it's not yours alone. Draven's hand in the shadows, the chalice laced with nightshade, your blade the final mercy in a web of deceit. The pack cheers a lie, blind to the thorns that choke the throne." Her chest heaved, the locket cooling once more, but its pulse echoed in her veins, a bridge between her rejection and his fracture. "And I, the Pathfinder they banished. The Deucer marked me to see the unseen, to trace the silver way through the storm. You are bound to it, Thorn, to war or redemption. I am the key they feared." He recoiled slightly, not in rejection, but in the visceral strike of realization, his hand dropping to the cave floor where his blood had pooled and frozen into dark crystals. The wind outside picked up again, carrying faint weavos from the valley, Draven's hounds perhaps, or the kingdom's fractured loyalty stirring. Thorn's face hardened, the melancholy king confronting the destiny her gift had unveiled. Not just survival, but a moral reckoning, where power demanded compassion's blade over vengeance's. "The old blood stains more than my hands," he murmured, his eyes searching hers with the intensity that peeled back her defenses, revealing the Omega's quiet strength beneath the exile's scars. "If you are the key, then what lock do I turn? Freedom from the crown or chains to atone?" Ilara's heart twisted, the bond between them thrumming deeper now, resisted yet undeniable, a romantic tether born not of instinct alone, but of shared sight into the soul's abyss. The cave's chill pressed in, but the fire of revelation warmed the space, her gift manifesting as both burden and beacon. She saw his wound anew. Not physical, but the ethical dilemma etched in his gaze, the choice between fleeing the throne's corruption or wielding her visions to purge it. What was destiny, if not the courage to embrace the healer one had cast aside? The locket hung silent, its blood a testament to wounds that could forge unity from isolation. As the dawn strengthened, filtering through the entrance in pale shafts that gilded the snow beyond, Thorn reached for her hand once more, not to claim, but to share the weight. The threads of fate tightened, pulling them toward the judgment awaiting in the kingdom's frozen heart, where betrayal's fire would test the redemptive flame of truth. Yet in that moment, amid the stone's unyielding embrace, Ilara felt the stir of Renascimento, her gift once a curse, now the moon's quiet promise that even bloodied kings could find their path through an Omega's eyes. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The mountain's spine arched under the midday pallor, a frozen serpent uncoiling toward the kingdom's distant spires, where the air grew thick with the scent of hearth smoke and simmering unrest. Ilara's boots sank into the snow-churned path, each step a reluctant tether to the world she had been severed from, the locket at her throat swaying like a pendulum, marking the inexorable pullback to judgment. Thorn walked beside her, his stride measured despite the lingering ache of his wound, the bandage beneath his cloak a hidden reminder of her touch, practical, unyielding, yet laced with the unspoken empathy that had woven them through the cave's shadowed vigil. The wind whispered secrets through the pines, carrying the faint clamor of the valley below. The pack's howls, no longer unified in cheer, but fractured, laced with suspicion as Dreven's influence seeped like black ice into the court's veins. Her visions had not faded with the dawn. They lingered at the edges of her sight, silver threads pulsing with the deuce's insistent rhythm, illuminating the path ahead as clearly as the moon etched the snow in silver filigree. Ilara's heart clenched with the weight of it, the Pathfinder's gift, once banished as madness, now a compass pointing to the throne's corruption. Thorn's confessions in the cave had cracked open the door to understanding. His blade in the old king's chest, not born of blind ambition, but a mercy strike against Dreven's poison, a desperate bid to save the pack from a rival whose thorns already strangled the realm's roots. Yet mercy was a double-edged rune, carving guilt into his soul even as it shielded the innocent. She glanced at him, his profile etched sharp against the glacial sky, storm-gray eyes distant, as if he gazed inward at the blood he could never fully wash away. The kingdom's border loomed, a weathered arch of ice-crusted stone, flanked by sentinel pines whose branches clawed the air like accusatory fingers. The enforcer's scents hit first, musk and steel, sharpened by betrayal's bitter edge. They emerged from the tree line in a semicircle, 6 strong, their cloaks bearing Draven's thorn emblem hidden beneath the pack's lunar insignia. A deceit as subtle as the rival's smile. At their center stood Garrick, once Thorn's sworn brother, his face a mask of feigned loyalty cracked by avarice, eyes gleaming with the promise of the throne's shadow. The wind howled low, stirring the snow into eddies that danced around their boots, the air heavy with the metallic tang of drawn blades and the undercurrent of alpha challenge. "Traitor king!" Garrick snarled, his voice a guttural thunder that echoed off the stones, his gaze sliding past Thorn to fix on Ilara with predatory curiosity. "And the seer whore they cast to the wilds. The Deucer mocks us with this reunion." The pack enforcers shifted, their howls rising in a dissonant chorus, not the unified roar of old, but a fractured dirge laced with Draven's whispers. Ilara's skin prickled, the locket warming against her chest as visions flared, Garrick's hand on the poisoned chalice, his pact with the eastern rival, sealed in blood oaths under a eclipsed moon. The threads converged here, crimson and silver twisting in a moral knot, Thorn's past confronting them both, demanding the price of secrets unveiled. Thorn stepped forward, his body a barrier of restrained fury, the ethical king surfacing through the melancholy veil. His hand hovered near his dagger, but he did not draw it. the guilt in his eyes a silent plea for a path beyond slaughter. "The old blood was Draven's doing," he said, his voice steady as glacial flow, carrying the weight of truth forged in the cave's confessions. "Garrick, you handed him the cup. I ended the suffering you began, for the pack, not for glory." The words hung in the frigid air, a philosophical gauntlet thrown amid the snow's hush, challenging not just loyalty, but the soul's compass. What was strength, if not choosing truth over the crown's gilded lies? Garrick laughed, a hollow bark that cut through the wind, his blade flashing free in an arc of steel that caught the pale light. "Mercy, you reek of it, brother, like the Omega at your side." His eyes raked over Ilara, dismissing her as chattel, blind to the silver path she traced in her mind's eye. The enforcers advanced, boots crunching the snow like grinding teeth, their sense a wall of aggression that pressed against her Omega instincts, urging submission. But Ilara stood firm, the locket's pulse sinking with her resolve, its blood-drop core a fiery anchor against the tide of fear. She saw the dilemma crystallize: forgive the betrayer and risk the pack's soul, or wage war and drown in more crimson. Love or freedom? Thorn's bond to her, fragile and resisted, clashing against the liberty of exile she had tasted in the wilds. The clash erupted visceral and swift, a ballet of steel and shadow under the indifferent sky. Thorn met Garrick's charge, their bodies colliding with bone-jarring force, blades singing through the air in sparks of friction, snow sprayed like blood mist, the wind amplifying each grunt and clash into epic thunder. Ilara dodged an enforcer's swipe, her movements guided by the Pathfinder's grace, visions flashing the arc of his blade before it fell, allowing her to twist aside, her cloak tearing on a low branch. The cold bit deep, her breath ragged clouds that mingled with the scent of fresh blood as Thorn's dagger grazed Garrick's arm, drawing a crimson line that mirrored the old king's stain. In the fray's heart, Ilara's gift surged, unbidden and overwhelming. She locked eyes with Thorn across the melee, the silver thread between them igniting like lunar fire, revealing the choice's crux. War would claim Garrick's life, but forgiveness might unravel Draven's web without further fracture. "Thorn!" she cried, her voice piercing the chaos, poetic and urgent. "See the thorns, not his blade, but the pact behind it. Mercy crowns the true alpha." He faltered mid-strike, Garrick's weapon glancing off his shoulder in a spray of red, the hesitation a moral precipice. The enforcers faltered too, sensing the shift, their howls turning to uncertain growls as the Deuce's symbols converged, the wind dying to a hush, the snow settling like a veil over the bloodied ground. Garrick lunged again, but Thorn disarmed him with a twist born of restraint, pinning him to the snow with a knee to the chest. "Yield," Thorn rasped, blood trickling from his new wound. His eyes stormy with the war within, guilt demanding atonement, duty crying for war. Garrick spat defiance, but Ilara stepped forward, the locket blazing hot, her hand outstretched in a gesture of quiet command. "The Deucer sees all threads," she said, her voice a serene counterpoint to the violence, focusing on the ethical rift, forgiveness as the path to redemption, or freedom in letting the betrayer fall. Thorn's gaze met hers, the bond thrumming deep, resisted no longer but rationalized into acceptance, a romantic anchor amid the storm. He released Garrick, not in weakness, but in the strength of choice, the rival's man scrambling back, eyes wide with the fear of truths unveiled. The enforcers retreated into the pines, their howls scattering like ash on the wind, leaving the archway silent save for the drip of blood into snow. Thorn turned to Ilara, his breath heaving, the wound at his shoulder staining his fur in deep red, but his expression softened, melancholy yielding to a flicker of hope. "You chose mercy for me," he murmured, his hand brushing hers, the touch electric with shared vulnerability, the Omega's vision healing the king's fracture. Yet the dilemma lingered, spiritual and raw. Had they forged peace, or merely delayed the war that Draven's shadows promised? The locket cooled against her skin, its blood a solemn witness, as the kingdom's spires beckoned, demanding they face the pack's judgment with hearts entwined in redemption's fragile weave. What was love, if not the freedom to forgive the blood on hands that reached for light? The kingdom's spires pierced the twilight like frozen fangs, their ice-glazed summits catching the waxing moon's first silver kiss as Ilara and Thorn crested the final ridge. The wind, a relentless mourner, tugged at their cloaks, carrying the distant clamor of the great hall. Howls mingled with the crackle of hearth fires, a symphony of unrest that pulsed through the valley like a wounded heart. Blood from Thorn's shoulder wound trailed faint crimson ribbons in the snow behind them, mingling with the old king's echo in her visions. But the Pathfinder's gift now wove those stains into patterns of potential, threads of silver and red, converging not in vengeance, but in the quiet alchemy of healing. Ilara's fingers brushed the locket instinctively, its blood-drop core warm against the encroaching chill, a talisman of the rebirth she had glimpsed in the fray at the border. Mercy's blade sharper than steel, Garrick's retreat, a fragile seed of atonement planted in the frozen earth. Thorn walked with the measured grace of a king reclaiming his shadow, his storm-grey eyes reflecting the lunar glow, etched deeper with the melancholy of choices unmade. The ethical weight of his crown pressed upon him, guilt a constant companion since the throne room's deceit. But in her presence, it softened to something navigable, a shared burden rather than solitary chains. Their bond, once resisted as an Omega's instinctive snare, had rationalized itself through the cave's confessions and the border's clash. Not a reward for survival, but a proof of redemption, tender and tragic in its emergence from pain. She felt it now, humming beneath her skin like the Deuce's subterranean river, pulling her toward the hall where judgment awaited. Not as the banished seer, but as the pathfinder who could illuminate the throne's hidden thorns. The great doors loomed, carved with lunar phases that mirrored the locket's etchings, flanked by torches whose flames danced erratically in the wind, casting prismatic shadows on the snow-swept courtyard. The pack gathered within, their sense a turbulent sea of musk and suspicion, the air thick with the acrid bite of fear and the undercurrent of Draven's encroaching poison. Elders stood sentinel at the threshold, their faces gaunt masks of tradition, eyes narrowing on Ilara's return, the Omega they had severed, now arm in arm with the Alpha, whose hands bore the old blood. Whispers rippled like wind through dry leaves. The cursed one, the traitor's consort. But Thorn's presence silenced the murmurs, his Alpha aura a steady thunder, tempered by the vulnerability she alone had witnessed in the wilds. They entered the hall, the doors groaning shut behind them like the jaws of fate, sealing them in a cavern of stone and firelight. The central hearth roared, its flames leaping high to lick the vaulted ceiling, illuminating the assembled pack, hundreds of eyes, wolfish and wary, fixed on the dais where the throne sat empty, its furs still stained with the crowning's ritual blood. Draven's absence was a spectre, his eastern spies woven into the crowd like thorns in a bouquet, but Ilara's visions pierced the veil. Silver paths leading to hearts wavering between loyalty and greed. The locket burned hot now, its pulse sinking with the fire's crackle, drawing forth the final surge of her gift. A cascade of revelations that flooded her mind, visceral and unyielding. She stepped forward, the snow melting from her boots into dark pools on the flagstones, her voice rising clear and poetic amid the hush. "The Deucer does not crown the blind," she intoned, the words a philosophical anchor in the tension, her gaze sweeping the hall like moonlight over waves. The old blood was no conquest, but a mercy against the poison you all drank in ignorance. Draven's hand stirred the chalice, Garrick his vessel, and Thorn. Thorn ended the suffering to spare us the rival's shadow. Visions projected from her eyes, ethereal threads of crimson and silver unfurling in the air. Cinematographic illusions born of the Pathfinder's dominion, showing the throne room's betrayal in stark sensory detail. The chalice's glint, the old king's gasp, Thorn's reluctant blade flashing in torchlight, gasps echoed, the pack recoiling as if scorched, the fire's warmth turning oppressive, scents sharpening to the metallic tang of truth unveiled. Thorn stood beside her, his hand finding hers in a union unspoken yet profound, the touch a cure for his isolation, her rejection's scar fading under the bond's gentle insistence. Guilt flickered in his eyes, but it yielded to resolve, the ethical king embracing the moral precipice. Sacrifice the throne's illusions for compassion's reign, or cling to power and drown in more blood. Draven's chief enforcer lunged from the shadows then, a blade aimed at Thorn's back, but Ilara's gift anticipated the arc, her cry a warning that sent Thorn spinning, disarming the traitor with a fluid grace honed by their shared trials. The hall erupted, howls of confusion turning to roars of clarity as the silver threads exposed the eastern rival's web, enforcers turning on their own in a frenzy of retribution. In the chaos, Thorn pulled her close, his breath hot against her ear, amid the clash of steel and the wind's howl seeping through the walls. "You are my redemption," he murmured, voice a low rumble laced with the melancholy of what might have been lost, his free hand tracing the locket's curve. The contact ignited the final choice, not war's sacrifice, but union's healing, her visions purging the court's rot, his mercy crowning them both in the Deuce's light. She nodded, tears tracing warm paths down her chilled cheeks, the bond accepted fully now, romantic and redemptive, born of suffering's forge. Together they ascended the dais, the pack's howls shifting to a unified chorus, the old blood stain transmuted into the flame of rebirth. As the moon crested the hall's high windows, bathing the throne in silver, Ilara felt the locket cool to a serene warmth, its blood-drop core a symbol of wounds sealed. The kingdom, once cheering a lie, now witnessed truth's quiet triumph, rejection reborn as destiny, guilt healed in compassion's embrace. Thorn claimed the throne not alone, but with her at his side, their hands entwined, the fire's glow reflecting in eyes that saw beyond the storm. What was love, if not the ultimate choice, to heal the broken king with an Omega's unseen light, forging a realm where mercy outshone blood? The wind outside fell silent, the snow a pristine shroud over the mountains as the Deuce's weave completed its pattern. Suffering's end, Renascimento's dawn. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.